Today we're going to speak about self-persuasion, but we're going to speak about self-persuasion externalized, as we did in the last video where we spoke about frame control. And the idea behind it is that in the state of mind that we occupy, that which we say I am too, the state of mind, we experience others as reflections of that state of mind. So no one to change but self, and by changing ourself, by going into a certain state of mind, we will observe how others reflect that state of mind. Now, we may have a lot of assumptions of how we believe reality to work. And maybe in some scenarios, we may find ourselves saying that based on a circumstance, I will find myself in a disempowering state of mind or a negative state of mind. And based on another circumstance, I will find myself in an empowering state of mind. Same is to be said when we relate to others. We could say, based on certain conditions of how a person interacts with me, I will go into a certain state of mind. Now, when we recognize that we are still interpreting all of this within and giving all the meaning within, we ask ourselves, what are we assuming about ourselves? And so Neville states it very nicely when he says, I'm trying to show you that the ancients told the same story in all the stories of the Bible. All that they were trying to tell us is how to become that which we want to be. And they imply in every story that we do not need the assistance of another. You do not need another to become now that what you already want to be. So, that stated, and in reference to our discussions about maintaining the state of mind, and upon reflection of this quote right here, and our own experiences, we recognize that when we embody a certain state of mind, others become the reflection of that state of mind. Yes, there will be behavioral changes, conversational changes, communication changes, and other inner dialogues and interpretations about ourselves in relation to the other person, but it will be based on that particular state of mind. So, when we go into our imagination or we have a certain experience that brings us into a certain state of mind, which we would call the ideal state of mind, one where we assume that whatever it is that we desire is on the way to be brought forth, we feel a sense of connectedness between who we are and that particular experience. If at any point during the journey, the day-to-day journey, we feel a disconnect, then we have to recognize that we have fallen out of that state of mind. And we can find ourselves back in that state of mind by assuming, as he says here, that assumptions subjectively appropriated and believed to be true is faith. So in other words, living in faith. That means to translate, to interpret the different experiences that we have on the journey to the fulfillment of what we desire to experience from a place of that all of this is actually related, and to be able to see how so. And if we have challenges in doing it, then we ask ourselves, how do we get back into the ideal state of mind? For me, getting back into the ideal state of mind, in which then I could accurately assess the circumstance and relate it back to the true assumption that what I desire is on the way to being brought forth, and then the signs and synchronicities reveal themselves. The way I do it is both inner world and outer world. So inner world through self-talk or affirmation, and we're going to go through some affirmations on certain statements that are in relation to harmony, and we're speaking with others here, relating to others, harmony with others. Then we also notice that our interactions with the other person, or sometimes from the most unexpected ways, the other person reaches out without us consciously asking them to reach out, to play out that exact theater, that which we are assuming, which is represented in that state of mind. So a large part of the emphasis of his philosophy is the persistent assumption the feeling of the wish fulfilled. And as mentioned, the feeling of the wish fulfilled can be accessed via imagination, through visual, through auditory, through kinesthetic, through gustatory, and olfactory. We talked about this in Accessing States of Mind, NLP Accessing States of Mind. I'll put a link in the description to that. As well as outer world, certain environments, certain conversations, certain experiences that bring us into the ideal state of mind. When we're in that ideal state of mind, we're able to accurately understand the circumstances from a place of empowerment and in relation. If, for whatever the reason may be, we are unable to find ourselves in that state of mind, we may have difficulty interpreting. Not that it's not possible, but we may find difficulty interpreting. So think about any scenario that you have when you relate with others. If there's conflict, chances are you can only see the disempowerment assumptions within yourself play out as theater in the interaction with the other person. You may blame them, you may see them from a negative light, forgetting that these are our own concepts of self externalized. Now, remember a time when you have a positive experience with that person. You both are in a state of flow, enjoying life together. Notice how you have positive assumptions about that person, and then they play out the theater to those assumptions. So that's what he's referring to here when he says, and they imply in every story that we do not need the assistance of another. You do not need another to become now what you already want to be. So we change within, and then the thoughts, emotions, and behaviors flow from the state of mind that we occupy. He says, can you believe in its reality, knowing all things are possible to him that believes? Can you persuade yourself that although your reason and senses deny it, your assumption will make it so? So we may have a lot of reasoning and experiencing situations from our past that is within our subconscious, which we replay again as theater, and thus interpret the current experiences on our journey to the fulfillment of what we desire to experience from those perspectives. But we have to remember that those are past assumptions that may not be true for the current circumstance. And we can identify these elements, recognize that all things are possible, as in you can believe it to be another way, the interpretation of the journey, and thus experience it as theater on the journey to the fulfillment. For example, let's say you are starting a business, and on the journey to acquiring your clients, you have past assumptions of what we would call past business failures show up on the journey. As a result, you hesitate as you communicate with your prospects. You hesitate as you put out the messages that you know you have to put out to bring forth your vision, bring forth the clients. If in that moment we reflect and say this hesitation is not in harmony to the feeling of the wish fulfilled, it is not one of faith, we don't have to shame ourselves or blame ourselves. We just recognize that if we identify with that thought process, we will begin to dwell upon it and thus create our experiences from those perspectives. As we pause and reflect upon it, we can go into another state of mind, which is, wait a second, this is based on past assumption. This is not how it actually is, how I actually imagine. And since I believe that all things are possible, and that all of creation is complete, and I've seen it in my imagination, then all that is playing out is past assumptions, which I now have the power to change. Just as I have the power to assume the desired outcome, I also have the power to change my interpretations on the journey, thus transcending what we would call once reasonable, but it's no longer reasonable based on what you desire to create. Blake said in his wonderful Marriage of Heaven and Hell, he said, I dined with Isaiah and Ezekiel and asked, does a strong persuasion that a thing is so make it so? And Isaiah replied, all prophets believe it does. And in ages of imagination, a firm persuasion moved mountains. But many today are not capable of a firm persuasion of anything. So this is an interesting quote. Why is it that he said many today are not capable of a firm persuasion of anything? And upon my own cause and effect reflection and connections with others, discovering their assumptions, their beliefs, their paradigms, I realized that so much is infused from what we would call reactive or external locus of control based thinking, in we assume reality to operate from that perspective. The assumptions that we had formed from what we learned from others in past experiences, which we would call limiting assumptions or limiting beliefs, play out as theater, which create unnecessary complexity, convolution, frustration, and void on the journey. So, because we are living in a very connected world and we have access to large volumes of information, that can be a very positive thing as well as it can be something that can hinder our progress if we let it. The key word is if. By choosing and selecting the information that you consume to be related and persuasive of how you can achieve what you desire and how your journey is going to be one of flow towards the destination. That means reading the certain books, watching the certain videos, and consuming that information to saturate your mind. We start to become more self-persuaded as a result of the affirmation of that information, and thus feel more joy, bliss, and ease, and more intuitive on the journey, transcending past self-imposed limitation that many would choose to identify with, although their choice is subconscious or unconscious. They don't know that they're identifying with that information and believing it to be true and creating reality from that perspective and experiencing the journey to the destination from that perspective, or experiencing an inharmonious journey and thus giving up and not going all the way till completion when it comes to fulfilling what they desire, failing to realize that it's because they have been consuming information that is clouding their consciousness full of disempowerment. So thus, inner conversations, inner dialogue, and information that we're consuming in our environments, we want to keep it in a place of in contribution. So simply put, you know what it is that you're consuming each day. You're consuming information. Ask yourself, do you feel disempowered by this information or empowered? That feeling of disempowerment or feeling of empowerment is a wish fulfilled, a feeling of the wish fulfilled. So you don't want the feeling of the wish fulfilled be one of disempowerment. So then ask, why are you consuming that information? Or how do you interpret that information from a place of empowerment? Recognize what it means and move forward with that information rather than seeing it as it is closing all potentialities for you to bring forth what you desire. He says, everything here in this screen of space, in this outer world, everything here was once a desire believed. This building, the clothes you wear, the car you drive were first a desire, then believed into being. So, recognizing that we are the ones that are assuming how we relate to this outer world, and in this case, relating to others, and to the degree of perspective, affirmation, self-persuasion that we have, that we are on the journey to the fulfillment, it will externalize as others representing it, playing out that theater towards the destination. Now, when I reflect back on my experiences in the entrepreneurial space, I recognize that one of the empowering beliefs that I have instilled within myself, and either got it from somewhere or learned it, I had to have gotten it from somewhere, was that if you created something of value, that there is others that are ready to receive it. There's always going to be others that are ready to receive it. Whether that's true for everyone else, I won't say that, but it is true for me. So thus, when I create something, I always find those that are ready to receive it and exchange fair compensation for it. Now, if, and it did happen that on my journey I had disempowering programming regarding fair exchange and money, I was creating unnecessary friction. I was creating blockages that would play out in theater. I was creating them. They didn't actually exist until I assumed them to be exist, and this was subconsciously based on other beliefs that I had. And as a result, I noticed that I would create more friction during the communications. I would create more friction during the selling process. I would create more friction in my business by doing convoluted things and creating even more barriers for reaching the ideal prospects and communicating them in a way that would facilitate the decision, the buying decision. And all throughout the journey, I recognized that what I was doing was removing that resistance. I was removing it along the journey. And the resistance was revealed based on my interpretation. And all I had to do is persistently affirm the state of mind or the affirmation that said, I do have fair value, others are ready to receive the fair value, and I have creative ways of bringing forth the bridge between where I am right now, where they are, and the product or service, facilitated through fair dealing, money. Now, it may take a bit of time to assume something like that and affirm it in your consciousness, but this is the pathway. This is the same thing to be said about relationships or anything. That in regard. So if we reflect upon that particular experience where I was creating that unnecessary friction in the earlier stages of the journey, it was a form of imaginary argumentation. I was imagining this conflict in my mind, unnecessary conflict. And he states here, if you desire a change in your relationships at home or in business, you don't argue, you don't persuade them. Let every man be fully persuaded in his own mind. So by applying this in relation to that particular experience, we say, oh, I'm imagining all this conflict on the journey to the fulfillment. You can talk to people about this, about their relationships or their business or whatever, and ask them how they interpret the journey is going to be before they get into the ideal relationship or the ideal business or whatnot. And they're going to say certain things that is going to reveal their assumptions. It's going to be frustrating, it's going to be stressful. And if you say, how do you know that? They're going to say, based on past experiences or what other people said. In other words, they're not allowing themselves to think for themselves. Now, as we consume this information, we have the power to think for ourselves, create our own assumptions, and affirm them to be true. Now, I've got some affirmations that I want to share with you, assumptions in relation to others, but it's important to recognize that between where you are right now and that which you desire to be brought forth, the only thing that stands in between you and that destination is the concept of self, that what we assume ourselves to be, how we assume ourselves to be in relation to the destination, how we assume ourselves to be in relation to the journey. And what we can do is change those assumptions. Daily cause and effect reflection, asking ourselves, what are we assuming? Observing in our communication. If you don't ask yourself the question, what am I assuming? You can observe it in your communication, in how you communicate, in what you say when you communicate, when you're speaking with others, what you type, what you speak. Observe what has been expressed. And you might assume that you are speaking about something outside, but what we're actually doing is further affirming the cause within, the self-image within. If we look at it from that perspective, then we don't need to shame ourselves. We can understand ourselves and make the adjustments accordingly. He says, no matter what it is you desire, remember, nothing is impossible. What is now proved was once only imagined. So begin by imagining a state and persuading yourself that you are in it. Blake said, the ancients believed that if you are self-persuaded, it is so. There was a time in imagination when firm persuasion removed mountains. Now, we're not new to this. This is not something that is new to us. This is just something that we want to further remember and further affirm that we are the interpreter and the molder of this experience. And if we don't see it that way, we give the power, we reassign the power which we have within to outer world circumstance or outer world experience or outer world anything to do the thinking for us. Very important. This is a personal preference. I suggest, if you're building a business, that you are, to the best of your ability, I suggest if you're bringing forth an ideal relationship, to the best of your ability, realize the power is within, and you have the power to change how you relate with another person, people on the journey, as discussed in the previous video through the concept of frame control, which is essentially saying the same thing. That is what he's referring to. Because even in that video, we spoke about true frame control is not something that you say, I want the frame. It is who you are, and it externalizes as you having frame control. Because it is the level of conviction, the level of affirmation, the level of self-persuasion in that state of mind. So let's look at some assumptions about self in relation to others, some affirmations. In my thinking, speaking, and acting, I realize that I am unmoved by appearances, yet I move what appears. So again, this is what we're referring to in our conversations. To recognize more and more so each day that you are not being moved by the outer world expressions, the outer world externalizations from the past, what we have once imagined, but rather we move the outer world expressions and externalizations via how we assume reality to be. We put it to the test. We do it more so each day. And we recognize that then our thoughts, our emotions, our behaviors, and emotional integration between the five sensory experience and the inner world is one of harmony. I realize that all others are myself, and I have a greater ability each day to reflect upon how they represent the mood within me. So this implies that in your interactions with others, you can observe how, after you interact with them, or even during your interactions with them, how they're playing out the theater of the state of mind in which you occupy. My desires from the divine are in harmony with all and do not know conflict with others. So one of the things that we might have in our mind, which we had assumed to be true from our past, is that which we desire is in conflict with others. As in, if you bring forth what you desire, it's going to be in conflict with another person. That which we truly desire is always in harmony with all, and we may only have the assumptions and beliefs of how it's in conflict, but upon cause and effect reflection, we can actually identify how it's in harmony. Now, by affirming something like this, you're going to be able to see it more so each day, because these become the beliefs. And through the beliefs spawn sub-beliefs, related beliefs, corresponding events, corresponding signs, corresponding synchronicities that further integrate and affirm that particular belief, and thus creating a more flow-based journey to what you desire to experience. Day by day, I release from self-imposed limitation of my imagination in relation to others by representing them from higher degrees of love. What I imagine in love for others is what I imagine in love for myself. So the common thread of what we are speaking of is what Neville referred to once as the second man being brought forth, the true self, and molding this world of ours into the kingdom of love. That is done through the process of bringing forth what you desire. And then through the process of bringing forth what you desire, you evolve the concept of self. No one to change but self, as he refers to. And then you begin to think a certain way, behave a certain way, and emotionally integrate with this world a certain way. And it's from the perspective of love. So whatever affirmation we choose, or whatever state of mind we want to choose, even that which we desire to experience, what we imagine to be true, is done from a place of love. And as he states here, the event must always imply fulfillment of the wish, which represents a feeling of love, knowing that it is done. And also, how you reflect upon the different experiences or your interpretation of the five sensory experience on the journey. Always construct an event, he says, which you believe you will naturally encounter following the fulfillment of your desire. You are the judge of whatever event you really want to realize. So we have a desire, and we imagine, or we converse with ourselves, or we go through some kind of prayer, or some kind of inner dialogue that helps us affirm that what we desire to be brought forth will be brought forth. And then we get the feeling of love, knowing that it is done. And then a lot of times we relate with others on the journey. And since others, as he refers to, is us pushed out, then we can observe what we are assuming about ourselves in how we relate with others and how we interpret others to be. And this has been one of the most rewarding aspects of working with this information from Neville. One of the main reasons why I choose to now, for a long period of time, Sundays, release a discussion on Neville's information, because of the profound effects that this concept of how everyone is you pushed out is revealing aspects within myself that I could further change and optimize, which is really recognize which attributes are not of my true self and which are not. Further affirm those attributes that are which of the true self, which are brought forth upon reflections of how I interact with others, to become more of that as the world, the experiences, and the day-to-day journey to that which you desire to bring forth, as well as your day-to-day life becomes one of more harmony. He said, so can I persuade myself that you are as I desire to see you? To the degree that I can persuade myself, you will conform in the outer world to that persuasion. Now, in the last video, we talked about attributes of leadership and how those attributes are attributes of love. And what we are self-persuading is representing the other person in our mind's eye as a person that represents love. And it's how you interpret them to be. Now, they conform to that because that's really what they want to be. They really want to represent that assumption. Notice this. In your day-to-day business activities and leadership, if you represent those that you're communicating with from a place of love and understanding and those other attributes which we spoke about in the last video, notice how they mold to fit those attributes, willingly mold to fit those attributes. Then if a third party is looking at what you're doing, they would say you have excellent frame control. And what you have really done is further affirmed the true aspects of the true self, embodied those elements, and it externalizes as how you communicate with them. You'll know what to say, when to say, how to say, and you might say it in ways that may not make sense to a third party because they're not looking beyond the words. They may just be identified with what you're saying, but what is really happening is the reflection of the state of mind. That's the level of self-persuasion that we want. The state of mind externalized as the other person playing out the theater that represents that state of mind in harmony to the vision. He says you can remove seemingly mountainous obstacles which confront you by simply ignoring them and assuming the end. So by ignoring them, it's not referred to as ignorance. It's rather recognizing that we're the ones interpreting everything. And what is the accurate interpretation? So it's to put aside a disempowering interpretation of the person that you're dealing with and further affirm an empowering interpretation of the person that you're dealing with, one that is in harmony with the relationship between you and them and the vision. And those affirmations that I shared are some that you can identify with, which will automatically cause you to assume the end, which is a harmonious journey and interpretation. So if you don't do that, you might experience friction. Or as we spoke about in the last video, you fall out of the frame or fall out of the state of mind because you're always choosing different states of mind. A lot of times it's subconscious, unconscious, but we want to become more conscious on how we choose the ideal state of mind or the states of mind we want to be in, because as discussed earlier, that's what's creating our interpretation and our experiences with people. He says, and if you have to go over the mountain, you will, or the mountain will be removed. Whatever is necessary to be removed for you to fulfill what you have assumed will be done for you as long as you remain faithful to yourself, the source of all life. So we're going to commit to that which we love. It's easier to commit to that which we love, which is the foundation of what I was referring to many years since I discovered it, the Ikigai principle, which is doing what you love to do, what you're good at, what the world needs, what you get paid for. The very first statement is do what you love to do. And even Steve Jobs said it in his commencement speech. He said, follow your heart and intuition. They somehow know what you want to become. Everything else is secondary. He says, find what you love to do. He peppered it all throughout the conversation. And it wasn't just him. If you look at all philosophies, all spiritualities, all riddled throughout Neville's work, you will find the concept of love. And Neville even stated that any idea that doesn't spontaneously bring forth a feeling of love out of our hearts when we think about the concept of God is not a true idea of God. So you pushed out as others, representing others from a place of love on the journey to what we desire to experience, whether it be relationships, friendships, business success, whatever it is. This is what is externalizing, and it is easy to externalize because it is our true nature to be one of love. It is the true essence of what we represent, love. So assumptions from the perspective of love, or loving assumptions about ourselves in relation to others, is how we bring forth our vision and how we remove the friction on the journey. Thus, we will see it play out as theater, you pushed out as others, the reflections. He says, causation is in the mind of the one who is self-persuaded, and there is no other cause, for the world is our awareness pushed out. So, again, we may have these interpretations of where it is true and where it's not true, but more and more so each day we want to bring ourselves to this higher level realization, higher degree of self-realization. Because then what we do is then if we have circumstances or experiences on the journey, we recognize that what are we assuming? What are we imagining? And change that and affirm it to be done and observe how it changes. And then when we see it change, that's a further affirmation. That's an experience-based affirmation in which we believe ourselves, trust ourselves, and then listen to ourselves even more. And then this information makes even more sense. So that's why he states here, I am still reflective. And most of us in this world are reflective life. And the purpose of a church of this nature is to make us not reflect, but to affect life. So yes, we've gone through a journey of learning, but we then bring ourselves to a point where we bring forth our true self. And the true self is one of affecting life, creating life. And as a result of affecting, we will see the reflection. Whereas many circumstances or experiences in our life, we have been reflective of past interpretations, or reflective, or we call this reactive, to the outer world. And our goal is to identify, why are we reactive? What is the meaning? What is the assumptions we're interpreting reality from that creates this association, which we call reactivity, this type of five sensory integration, emotional reactivity. We can change the five sensory integration based on perspective and thus feel less reactive to that same circumstance, or no reactivity. So he says, I urge you not to go to anyone on the outside. The desire you seek is housed within you. You can become self-persuaded of anything, and if you do, it will project itself on your screen of space. Take gold, the wisdom of revealed truth. Take silver, the knowledge which comes from experience, or the precious stones of noble and lovely thoughts, for fire will not destroy them. When you are in doubt, do the loving thing. So again, very important aspect when it comes to what are we assuming. When we feel naturalness in what we're imagining, that which we desire to experience, and our interpretations on the journey, what we're imagining, because we're imagining all day long. And when we are imagining from a place of love, then we are doing the loving thing. And then the thoughts, the actions, the behaviors, and the outer world circumstance reflect, because that's what's going on. Now, all of this comes down to self-persuasion, higher and higher degrees of self-persuasion, and recognizing that what is revealed here in the outer world is an externalization of our own interpretation within. So it seems almost obvious then, you change the interpretations within. But why is it then that it comes off as being challenging? Well, perhaps we are still reaffirming some of the disempowering information on how we're interpreting what has already showed up right now, because this is what's once imagined. And we continue to affirm it, and we're not recognizing that we're continuously affirming disempowering programming. Now, this is where we go through our journey day to day. We all go on it. I go on it, you go on it, everyone goes on it. To identify where's the disempowering programming, the interpretations, the assumptions that are disempowering, that are limiting in relation to our vision, in relation to those that we want to relate with who are either directly or indirectly part of our vision and ourselves, and change them. Change these assumptions within through the power of affirmation, through the power of inner conversation, through the power of being in harmonious environments and consuming information that further affirms those empowering assumptions, as well as maintaining the flow state of mind, the ideal state of mind, knowing that from the state of mind, all things are added. If you want to copy this mind map, the link is in the description. Thank you very much for watching. I'll talk to you soon. Take care.